Imagine the scene. Someone walks in, maybe your boss, and says to you, "Can I have a few minutes of your time? I need to give you some feedback." Think about what's happening within you. For some of us, those are stirring words, and perhaps it evokes within us an increasing pressure and the expectation that we're going to get some bad news. And it's common in those situations to become defensive. Today, we're going to explore the question, how do you become less defensive at work? Defensiveness is a common human response to feedback. But today I want to focus on 5 different skills that you might want to embrace and expand that will help you become less defensive in work. Stay tuned, because at the end I want to offer you a link to a free survey that will assess your present level of defensiveness. When it comes to assessing our level of defensiveness, I think first of all it's important for us to explore what does defensiveness look like and how does it show up in the workplace. Well, defensiveness has many different faces. But let's look at 4 different faces that show us that a person is becoming defensive. The first face is blaming. So whenever feedback is given to you, sometimes a defensive person will begin to look for different excuses for the behavior that is being explained. And they will attempt to shift the blame away from themselves onto someone else or some event that exonerates them from responsibility. And so a person who is being defensive very often will be a person who blames others and events as an excuse for what happened. The second face of defensiveness actually is someone who makes constant excuses. Just like the blaming and shifting the blame to someone else or something, a person who is defensive always has an excuse for what happened. They're never able to sit down and to explore what's being said, but rather the first thing that comes out of their mouth is something that excuses what has just happened. The third phase of defensiveness is counterattack. This is where the person takes the feedback but then goes into an attacking mode on the other person. This is a classic phase of defensiveness, that rather than accepting some of the feedback that's been given, the person attacks the other person, personally very often, as a way of shutting down what is being explained to them. And finally, the fourth phase of defensiveness is this need to be correct. You know, sometimes when we receive feedback, certain people are not able to receive that without taking it incredibly personally. And it's almost as a sign of attack on them personally. And their inner need to be correct in all things drives their defensiveness. And this inner inability to actually point to things that they have done incorrectly means that they're defensive and they go in the attack of the other person. So those are the 4 different faces of defensiveness. Take some time just to think about, does that ever show up whenever you're receiving feedback in how you behave? The second skill is to recognize what defensiveness feels like in our body. Whenever we begin to be defensive, we have a physiological reaction that can be a telltale sign to us that we are actually becoming more defensive. This normally begins with more tension around the body. So whenever we hear those words, "I'd like to give you some feedback," and you sit down in front of the person, we begin to feel nervousness, but we also have this growing tension around the body. This adds to this level of being closed to what's being received in our way. We also have a growing temperature within us. Part of growing anxiety is that increase in temperature. That may be seen both externally, as in red cheeks and a growing redness in the skin, or internally, that we begin to feel that pressure building up. Physiologically as well, it may also see in our body language, in that we attempt to detach ourselves from what's happening. You know, when a person is engaged in a conversation, what normally happens is they move in, they become closer to the person. But people who are being defensive, very often what you'll see is them moving backwards. They're actually putting distance between what's being said and what they are receiving. So take note of those physiological signs, because they are wonderful information and signals to you that perhaps you're entering a more defensive mode. The third skill is the ability to intervene in the moment to assess how you are feeling. You know, when we're able to detect all the different signs that perhaps we are being defensive, perhaps we've arrived and we've noticed how tense we are. And then in the conversation, as feedback is being given, we've seen all those physiological signs we just mentioned. It's good at that point to go to skills that can actually intervene and can reset what's happening. One of the most popular ones that I teach the clients that I work with is called the 7-second reset. And what's wonderful about the 7-second reset is, first of all, it's only 7 seconds. And secondly, you can do it anywhere because it is so brief. So what is the 7-second reset? Well, it's breaking down those 7 seconds and doing something differently with each of the seconds. So second number 1 is recognizing your feet planted on your ground. This is the grounding. You know, when we become defensive, one of the things that happen is that we are emotionally triggered. And what we want to try and do is kind of move away from some of that emotional triggering. And one of the helpful ways to do that is to actually focus on the physicality of our feet on the ground. So we take a second to focus on the feeling of our feet on the ground. And then with seconds 2, 3, and 4, we breathe in. And as we breathe in, we're beginning to notice what's happening with our body. We begin to notice certain things like, have we become engaged moving forward or disengaged? Are we seeing increasing tension in our body? Perhaps our jaw is becoming tense. Perhaps our shoulders are tense. Perhaps we're beginning to close in our body. And then with seconds 5, 6, and 7, we breathe out. And as we breathe out, we begin to make adjustments in our body, which will signal that we are open to what is being received. And so if we've found that we have moved back, we're going to reposition ourselves so that we're actually present. If we found that we've closed up and that we're not being receptive to what's being said, we begin to open our bodies and to readjust. This simple 7-second reset is an ability for us to reset what's happening, to notice that we are being defensive, and to become more open in the moment so that we are actually receptive to what's happening. Before we move to the next 2 skills, I just want to mention that if you have not subscribed for the YouTube channel, now's an opportunity to do that. You can also press the bell and you'll be reminded of upcoming videos. Each week I produce a video on emotional intelligence, just like this one, about being less defensive at work, which will help you show up more in control of your emotions, both at work and at home. If you also have some suggestions from different topics that you would like me to address, I invite you to drop them in the chat below as well. I'm always open to new suggestions for new videos. The 4th skill is to listen with curiosity. Why I mentioned the 7-second reset before I mentioned this is that if we are closed and if we are defensive, it's very hard to be curious. So when we have done the 7-second reset, when we've adjusted our body, then what we want to try and do is just to be curious about what's being said. You know, when we feel defensive, very often what's happening is we are taking everything incredibly personal. And so what you want to try and do is put some distance between how you're receiving the words and the words themselves. There's a visualization exercise that I love to suggest to my clients, and many of them have found it incredibly effective. And that is to imagine the words that are leaving the other person's mouth. Instead of them hitting you personally, they fall in between the space. So if there's a table between you, they fall on the table. If there's a space, they just fall there. And just to be curious about those words, to explore them, to ask, why are they being said? Because what we're trying to do is to create a space where we become a little more open to what's being said. To be able to think about, is it applicable or is it not? You know, an interesting question that I love to ask whenever we're receiving feedback is this simple question. Am I receiving and looking at the tip of an iceberg or an ice cube floating on the ocean? And what I mean by that is what's being said really something that is important, genuine feedback that's the tip of an iceberg that really is exploring something that I need to change? Or is this just something that's an ice cube floating in the ocean that's going to dissipate? Because what's important is those tips of the iceberg, those nuggets of feedback that will really help us improve. That's what we want to focus on. And that truly is a gift for our development. And the final skill is to embrace a growth mindset. Now, there are two different mindsets when it comes to our personal development. There is a fixed mindset and there is a growth mindset. A fixed mindset has thoughts such as, I have to get it right at once. I cannot be wrong. I have reached the pinnacle of my growth. And a growth mindset is, mistakes are an opportunity to grow. I have much more to grow in my self-development. It's a different mindset in how we approach what we receive in life. And when it comes to feedback, a growth mindset can truly help us develop the different areas in our life that help us become a more rounded professional. And so it's important for us to consider that as we approach everything in life, one of the things and one of the mindsets that is marked by a growth mindset is the mindset of a beginner. I want you to think about a pastime or a hobby that you took up. And I want you to think about, what was it like the first couple of months that you took up that hobby? I'm sure that you were able to make mistakes. I'm sure that you had a mindset that it's okay, I'm just a beginner. One of the hallmarks of a beginner is to receive feedback, knowing that you don't have to be perfect, that there is growth. You see, that beginner mindset, that growth mindset, is a really helpful mindset when it comes to receiving feedback. So there you have 5 different skills that are important from moving away from being defensive into a much more growth mindset and receiving the feedback that will help us grow and develop. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned a link that I provide to a free resource which will help you assess how defensive are you at the moment. So if you click below, you'll find that link, and there's a couple of questions there that will really help you get into that question, assess where you're at. And then I invite you to come back to this video and to once again explore the different skills I mentioned and how you can develop more resilience and become less defensive. And if you've enjoyed this video, I invite you to click on the next, which explores how to give feedback to team members.